I've never been the kind of person to believe in ghosts, let alone talk about them in public. But what happened to me one cold autumn in Virginia still wakes me at night in a cold sweat. And no matter how many times I try to convince myself it must have been a trick of my imagination, the memory always comes crawling back, darker and more real than anything I've ever known. It all started when I moved from Richmond to a more secluded rural area just outside a small town called Amherst, hoping to escape the noise and fast pace of the city. I'd found an old farmhouse on the edge of a large stretch of woods, quiet, isolated, and full of rustic charm. The house had been abandoned for years, so it needed a lot of work, but I was excited to restore it and make it my own. Almost immediately after moving in, I began to feel as if the place carried an unnerving silence, not the peaceful kind you find in the countryside, but a heavy, thick stillness that seemed to press down on my chest as soon as the sun began to set. At first, I chalked it up to being alone in a new place. Then the small things started happening. The first night, I was unpacking some boxes in the living room when I heard slow footsteps upstairs. They were faint, but unmistakable. I froze, thinking someone had broken in, and grabbed a flashlight before edging toward the staircase. I called out, "Hello? Is someone up there?" No answer. The footsteps stopped. I searched the entire upstairs, room by room, closet by closet, but there was no one. I tried to convince myself maybe I was just tired and hearing things. For the next few days, nothing major happened. Just occasional tapping sounds on the walls, a creaking floorboard here and there. Typical old house noises, I thought. But on the fifth night, I woke up suddenly at around 2:30 a.m., covered in goosebumps. I had this intense feeling that someone was standing at the foot of my bed, watching me. In the pitch-black darkness, I couldn't see anything, but the presence was so strong I could barely breathe. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it echoing in my ears. After a while, the feeling gradually faded, and I mustered enough courage to turn on the bedside lamp. The room was empty. I stayed awake until sunrise that night. About a week later, I decided to explore the woods behind my property. It was late afternoon when I set out, the sky still bright and clear. The trees were tall and densely packed, and after walking for about 15 minutes, I came across a small clearing with what looked like the crumbling remains of an old stone foundation. It was strange, almost unsettling. As I stood there, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me, as if the air itself had suddenly become heavier. A chill crawled up my spine, and I suddenly had the overwhelming urge to leave. I turned around and headed back, a strong feeling of being watched following me until I stepped out of the tree line. I told myself it was just nerves, but somehow I knew the woods were hiding something. That night, I fell asleep early, exhausted from the long day. But I didn't stay asleep long. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of whispering coming from the hallway just outside my bedroom door. It was soft and raspy, like multiple voices quietly murmuring together, too low to understand. I felt paralyzed with fear, unable to move. The whispering seemed to grow louder, more urgent, and then suddenly stopped. I lay still for what felt like hours before I finally got the courage to get up. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Nothing was there. But as I turned around to go back inside my room, I saw something written on the hallway wall in faint, dusty-looking letters. "Go back." My blood ran cold. I knew I hadn't written that, and I hadn't seen it before. Shaking, I turned on every light in the house and couldn't fall back asleep until dawn. The next morning, I tried to scrub the words off the wall, but they wouldn't come off no matter what cleaner I used. It was as if they were etched into the paint itself. That day, I seriously considered packing up and leaving. But I'd invested everything I had in that house. I convinced myself someone had broken in again and played a prank. Though deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Later that week, I was working in the living room when I heard a loud thud upstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. It sounded like a heavy piece of furniture being pulled slowly. My heart hammering, I rushed upstairs to the master bedroom where the noise had come from. The large dresser that usually sat against the wall had been moved several feet into the middle of the room. There were long scratch marks on the floor where it had been dragged. I was completely alone in the house. I stared at the dresser, unable to believe what I was seeing. I backed out of the room and ran downstairs, my hands trembling. I called a friend of mine and asked him to come over. When he arrived, I told him everything that had been happening. At first, he was skeptical and suggested maybe I was just stressed from the move. But when I brought him upstairs to show him the dresser, he went pale. We pushed it back against the wall together, and he stayed with me for a couple of hours. But nothing else happened while he was there. After he left, I sat in the living room for a long time, afraid to go back upstairs. That night, I slept on the couch with the lights on. Over the next couple of days, the activity escalated. Doors would slam shut on their own. Objects would go missing and then turn up in strange places. And I constantly felt like I was being watched. One night, I was washing dishes when I heard a woman's voice behind me softly say my name. It was so clear, so close, that I spun around, expecting to see someone standing there. But there was no one. The voice sounded sad, almost pleading. "Please," it whispered. "Leave." A wave of terror shot through me, and I dropped the plate I was holding, shattering it on the floor. Slowly, I backed away from the kitchen, trying to keep my eyes on every corner of the room at once. That was the first time I heard the voice, but it wasn't the last. A few nights later, I woke up again around 3 a.m. to the sound of a soft, rhythmic knocking coming from the wall behind my bed. It was slow and deliberate. I couldn't move. The knocking stopped, and then I heard that same woman's voice again, so close it sounded like she was whispering right into my ear. "Get out before it takes you." I sprang out of bed and turned on every light in the house, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. The air felt heavy, almost electric, and I was certain that something unseen was in the room with me. Terrified, I stayed up until daylight and decided I had to find out more about the history of the house. I drove into town and went to the local library to look through old records. After hours of searching, I came across a newspaper article from 1978 about a family who had lived in the house. According to the article, the father had disappeared one night after wandering into the woods behind the property. His wife claimed he'd been hearing voices and acting strangely before he vanished. A search party had found his body 3 days later at the old stone foundation deep in the woods. The article said that the wife insisted something evil in the woods had taken him. A few months later, she was found dead in the house, apparently having taken her own life. The article ended with a chilling quote from one of the search party members. "There are things out there in those woods that don't belong to this world." My hands were shaking as I read those words. I photocopied the article and drove back to the house, feeling a mixture of dread and panic. That night, I decided to sleep downstairs on the couch again, but sleep never came. Around 2:45 a.m., I heard footsteps slowly coming down the stairs. The same slow, deliberate footsteps I'd heard on my first night in the house. They stopped at the bottom step. My breathing became shallow. Then, from the darkness of the hallway, I saw a shadowy figure emerge. It was tall and thin, its features impossible to make out, as if it were made of darkness itself. It didn't walk. It glided. The air around it seemed to ripple, as though it were bending reality. I was frozen in place, unable to move or scream as it silently approached me. When it was only a few feet away, it stopped, and I felt a piercing cold shoot through my entire body. Suddenly, in a whisper that seemed to come from all around me, I heard, "He belongs to me now." A surge of pure terror broke through my paralysis, and I bolted up from the couch, running toward the front door. But before I could reach it, every light in the house flickered violently, and the door slammed shut on its own so hard the glass in the windows rattled. I tried to pull the door open, but it wouldn't budge, as if something was holding it closed. The shadow figure loomed closer. I could feel its presence wrapping around me like a suffocating fog. And then I heard her again, the woman's voice, clearer than ever before, desperate and fierce. "Run!" she cried. With a sudden crack, the front door burst open on its own. I didn't hesitate. I ran out of the house into the cold night air and didn't stop running until I reached my truck parked near the edge of the driveway. I jumped in, started the engine, and tore down the road without looking back. The house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, but for a brief second, I saw the shadow figure standing in the front doorway, watching me leave. I didn't return to the house for several days. I stayed in a motel in town, too terrified to even step foot on the property.